Forward Base Sawano at Xeno Island by Tactical Cat. Episode 7. Dihydrogen Oxide? The docks were bustling today. Not to say they weren't usually cluttered, but they were especially stuffed at the moment. "John, quit slacking off! Breakfast is over already!" John slinked ingloriously back to his station, trying to dodge Senior Chief Annie's shouting. "Aren't you supposed to be working in the hull today? I want to see what this thing can do. You get the honor, so don't waste it." He clambered up into a nearby maintenance machine. Annie was in loud spirits today, hands glued at her sides, feet spread apart. She was fierce for her size, with one of the biggest voices on dock. She had to be, with an unruly bunch of boys at her command. "Remember, people, jewels of the fleet!" Clap, clap. "Let's get this done before Captain Adams' first delivery, shall we? Gonna be a busy week." As for just what Captain Adam was going to deliver, all she knew was that it would entail more busy work for the mechanics. John swung the crane arm over the prow of the Sawano fan, gigantic magnetic plate swaying as it moved. The plate spilled its shadow as it passed, whirring obnoxiously as cables and chains clattered. Drill bits and thermotorches fired off, clearly audible, even through the standard-issue earmuffs. The metal plate stopped above the hull breach, and Annie moved closer toward the isolated site to supervise. "It's clear!" She waved a hand up toward the vehicle cockpit where John was sitting, hands placed in the holographic steering system. Annie stood beside the crane, its rubber tracks almost her height as they extended back toward the main base to counter the weight of the magnet. "You're in good position. Try it now." There was a low-level drone as the magnet drew power from the cables. At last, it sucked up a glob of goo into the air, which pooled around the slab. Annie nodded satisfactorily, assuming a triumphantly wide stance. "Lols, no inanimate goo will ever defeat us. The Sona's ours, you got that?" A few heads turned, wondering who was shouting at unconscious chemical material. John's magnetic arm continued to clean up. Now that the preliminary tests had gone well, it was only a matter of time until the area would be safe for human labor. Pleased with the immediate success, Annie slipped a communication screen sideways out of her shirt pocket and pulled up a series of diagrams. Early this morning, Sten's lab apprentices, Xeno and Dark Knight, had released cleanup instructions and preliminary redesigns for the jewels based on new research. New research meant an exciting day at the docks. Those blueprints would be the topic of many a long evening as the entirety of mechanical engineering gawked at the artistic precision. Annie squinted over the plans. Magnetism really should have been an obvious solution, but they had no idea the goo was likely to be ferromagnetic until AZ had run a spectroscopic analysis on its components. As for what to do with the ships when they got the goo off... What the... Something's missing here. What is it? She scanned the pages again, squinting suspiciously over the diagram models. What the heck is it made from? Why'd they leave that out? The outfitting plans only specified the dimensions of a spaced armored layer designed to replace the current secondary hull. They made no qualification, however, about the material, which was extremely unspecific for AZ's usual work. Without being able to calculate the stress tolerance and the weight involved, how are they supposed to, build anything? "Gotta refer this up to Lieutenant Harmon," she muttered. He was their direct superior, so he tended to spend most of his time supervising. They didn't see him often. He'll know what to do. Maybe. Probably. There was always an immediate superior to rely on when things at the grunt level stopped making sense. If Lieutenant Armand didn't know, he could always refer up to Captain Thulner. And if he didn't know... that was his problem. Over at the other end of dock, another team was setting up scaffolding around the ashes to prepare it for re-outfitting. Since it had taken the least damage out of all the ships on the way back, it was the first available for testing the new gear. It would also be a better gauge of the amount of engine strain to expect, since the Ashes wasn't equipped with the nuclear reactor in the Sawano fan and coordinate. While the mechanics rushed about, Toby watched up on the viewing platform beside the entrance, coffee in hand, reviewing the base personnel lists. This morning, Ken had highlighted a few suspects, so now he was just waiting on intel to collect enough evidence to warrant action. As head of the disciplinary division, essentially the local military police, he was more than prepared to march in and rid Sawano base of all its rats, especially after the morning's briefing on Dio. Toby swiped through a few pages of personnel profiles on his comm screen. Seaman Doe was the immediate priority. It wasn't as if they needed evidence to suspect someone who had engaged in active combat against 2 captains, inflicted quite some damage, yelled out his name in public, and helped to collapse the bridge infrastructure of their fleet carrier before making off. The actual issue would be finding him and figuring out where he came from. Fortunately, Toby's best investigative officer, Lieutenant Commander Piek, was already assigned to the matter. He sipped another mouthful of coffee. Lieutenant Angela had suggested the aggressively caffeinated Lunarian cup at breakfast earlier, and something told him it would be particularly useful in the near future. As he watched scaffolding slowly blanket the hull of his Ashes, he chuckled, thinking over what had happened at the labs today. "What is this?" Admiral Now had inquired, after Sten revealed the new plans at the AZ lab. "Sten, it's liquid! Yuki, are you seeing this?" A voice confirmed from the screen in his hand. He had acquired Thulner's and Yuki's electronic presence through the comm screen. "I see it, sir," she said, nodding in the screen from sickbay. "It's unconventional, but nothing says it's completely implausible." "Don't take his side," opined Now, bantering with her. "Of course, sir." "We'll be a farce out there looking like that." "I don't disagree, sir," added Yuki. "Perhaps that was his intention?" Now shook his head. "The material itself," began Sten, with his usual musical intonation, making a point to ignore their conversation, "will be suspended by an electromagnetic field generated by cables run alongside the hull. There should be no need to worry about waterproofing the cables. If this works as I expect, it should refract and, in the best cases, entirely deflect those lasers of theirs, depending on how thick you want the outer layer to be. Naturally, a thicker layer of this armor will, of course, demand more energy throughput, as the EM field will have to carry it consistently. This necessary energy can be sourced by rerouting the engine output, but that would tax it considerably and decapitate your top speeds. In order to circumvent this most unfortunate of predicaments, one of my assistants suggested we produce the necessary material directly from the sea while the ships are en route, reducing the high-energy, constant maintenance otherwise required. Following from this, on page 4 we've compiled the material request that I asked you to authorize, Admiral. That will be necessary for constructing an on-board addition to the engine that should help create the armored layer. Unfortunately, one question remains as yet unsolved. Interrupted a series of trills. Adam flapped his flippers a little in insulted protest. Someone was not happy. "Oh, well, yes, of course, Adam," replied Sten, glancing downward where Adam stood by the Admiral's boot. "I most certainly did not completely forget your fleet existed. Whatever could you possibly be insinuating?" No one was pretending to be convinced. But, who is to say we can't run wires about the Vogel and Kayfig? A little unusual, maybe a lot dangerous, but the resulting aim field would be substantial. Sten, let's review from the top, interrupted now, calmly, trying to make sense of the nonsense that had overthrown the briefing. Sten would not have been the lab head if he was unable to approach this sort of work with that curious fascination of his, but now could never escape the impression that it bordered on childishness. In the background of his comm screen, Thulner was frantically sketching across a blue sheet of paper in bed. Obviously, he wasn't the only one confused. "What's it made from?" called out Thulner to Yuki's comm device. "I got your sketches, and the dimensions are good, but..." Thulner held up his blueprint model in the background of Yuki's screen. Confusion slapped over his face. The largest, most mischievous grin crept over Sten's expression. They had no idea what was coming. He led them into the circular, dark lab, where the old cylinder of goo accentuated the center of the room. "This way." He went off to the side. A workspace had been set up in a circular chamber in the wall. There was a hefty curtain over the chamber, wires and huge vacuum tubes spilling out from the bottom and right side, and the hum of a generator duetted with the occasional bubbles from the goo. "Introducing my most ingenious solution yet," announced Sten. He made his way toward the left end of the curtain. "Just hurry," complained Ken, with no patience for overdramatic flair. He was already multitasking another job at the same time, face buried in a comm screen as he listened. He could have read an entire book in the time it took anyone from AZ to explain the latest research. The point was to use this stuff. No one except Thulner and Toby ever wanted analyses on their tech. "I present the new fleet armor." Sten drew aside the curtain. "Dihydrogen Oxide." Toby had a hearty chuckle. Seeing the sheer disillusionment on the Admiral's face then had made that episode all the more memorable. Contented sigh, coffee sip. He placed his mug down as a light flashed in the bottom of the screen. "Sir, we found him." "Good work, Piek. Hey!" someone shouted from the door. "Got a runner! Don't let him get away!" Clang! A cascade of green storage barrels tumbled over each other by the right wall of the dock. A robed man waded through the jetsam, sprinting towards the bay where Ken's coordinate had been docked underwater. Another man in uniform chased after, the white epaulets at his shoulder distinguishing him from the fully suited mechanics. The MPs were on top form today. As chaos and uproar arrested attention down by the ships, Toby calmly slid his chair back, placed his coffee in the center of the table, and hopped the fence that separated the elevated viewing platform from the docks below. "Seaman," he called up to the cockpit of the magnetic crane. "Trade with me for a bit. I'd like to try something." The smug grin on his face was telling. John jumped out and switched places with him. What in Ron C is going on? He wondered with a headshake. The cloaked man who had sprinted in earlier pushed his way around a few people and leapt off the side of the docks into the sea. The officer in pursuit paused, just at the edge, staring disappointedly into the water where his prey had escaped. All of a sudden, there was laughter coming from high up. A heavy click resounded across the bay as electricity stirred. Chains clashed against cables. Toby chuckled, enjoying his new toy. With his hands enveloped by the holographic plotting dashboard, he shifted the plate above the bay where the man had jumped in. The MP officer at the edge gaped, wide-eyed, watching his culprit rise into the air toward the magnetic plate. He looked back around to find Toby grinning from the crane cockpit. Of course it had to be one of the captains. Glory hogs.